What a great couple of weeks it's been for Star Wars fans. Part 4 of Ahsoka ended on a massive bombshell with the world between worlds and Anakin Skywalker leaving us to speculate wildly for days. I expressed my own worries about how the mystical realm would be handled, and I'm so happy to say that I loved every second of it. I also expressed some lackluster thoughts on the de-aging of Anakin last week, but I don't know what was bugging me because he looked phenomenal in Episode 5. Maybe the best de-aging of a character I've ever seen. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was impressive, but had older Harrison Ford's voice. Hayden Christensen looked and sounded amazing, channeling Matt Lanter's take on the character from the Clone Wars. Not only were all of my anxieties wiped away, but Part 5, titled Shadow Warrior, moved the plot and emotional journey of Ahsoka along significantly. I'm about to dive into specifics, but first I want to remind everyone that the WGA and SAG-AFTRA are still on strike against the AMPTP, fighting for fair wages for the stories they bring to streaming services. Members of the AMPTP, like Disney, claim there's no good way to calculate views for residuals, but also brag about The Little Mermaid being its biggest movie premiere on the platform. Also, just a heads up, I got sick over the weekend, just feeling stuffy and under the weather, so if I sound different, that's why, but I have got to talk about this episode. Opening up on Cetos, Hera, Jason, and Chopper discover Huyang as they search for Ahsoka and Sabine. Thankfully, we get back to the world between worlds quickly and even get some of the answers I've been hoping to see. It's all very vague at the moment, but I think we can speculate a bit. How did Ahsoka get there? As many fans guessed, it would appear she traveled there as she was dying. I don't think she fully died, but was in the process of passing into the Force. Considering the world between worlds is connected to the Cosmic Force and Ahsoka's own connection to the realm from Star Wars Rebels, I can buy that her spirit or life energy or whatever you want to call it would end up there. I think the episode makes it clear that Anakin is a spirit as well, appearing to help her and, as he says, finish her training, and provide some closure. He isn't all blue and shimmery the way we're used to seeing Force ghosts, but again, since this place is within the Cosmic Force, I think he could appear to her however he chooses, and we see that appearance shift throughout the episode in a manner that reminds me of how Anakin appears to Luke in the novel Shadow of the Sith. I do think there's a question of whether or not any of this is real, like it could all simply be a fever dream of Ahsoka's while she skirts close to death. I think that's up to interpretation for the audience. I choose to believe it all happened, since Jason could hear or sense the lightsaber battle through the Force, but really, I don't think it matters if it's real or not. Ahsoka found the closure and catharsis she needed. Whether it was through the Force or on her own isn't important. It's kinda like Inception, which makes a similar argument. Humans can find meaning and growth through dreams or stories just as well as they can through their own real experiences. It doesn't matter how a lesson is taught as long as it's learned. Like Anakin says, one is never too old to learn. Well, I just spent a lot of time on the opening shots of the world between worlds alone, and my nose didn't bleed, so I'll consider that a win. I absolutely was not expecting Anakin and Ahsoka to duel in this episode, but it's one of those times I'm so glad to have been wrong. The best lightsaber fights are all about the emotional stakes underneath, and Ahsoka is literally in a fight for her spirit, working through her identity as a Jedi and her desire to be more than a soldier while fighting against the man who trained her to be a soldier is perfect. And again, Hayden looks so good in these shots. It's like they're straight out of 2005. Back on Cetos, we get a fun mention of Senator Organa attempting to cover for Hera, and Jason convinces her to slow down and listen to the duel happening within the spirit realm, and she hears them. I think that scene builds perfectly off the idea that anyone can feel the Force if they're open to it, an argument that this series has been making since Episode 1. I mean, really, it's always been the philosophy of George Lucas and Star Wars, but it got a little muddled over the years. I love seeing it illustrated so clearly here. I also love that Jason is instrumental to the plot of this story. We've waited so long to learn more about him, and I'm glad he isn't simply along for the ride. The kid is able to break through the anxious thoughts of his mother to help her see the truth. Also, Carson Teva is how I envision the entire audience of this show who never watched The Clone Wars or Star Wars Rebels. I think the series is doing a good job at balancing new information for those of us that have, while also trickling out what everyone else needs to know. We've all been waiting for a mention of Kanan Jarrus, and now we've got it. We just had to be patient, because it would have been a lot to just inundate the live-action-only audience with the complete history of every returning Star Wars Rebels character. Paul Sun-Hyung Lee's delivery of the simple and exasperated, okay was perfect. Returning to the world between worlds, the duel between Master and Apprentice continues. Their banter feels like it's straight out of the Clone Wars. Speaking of, Anakin sends her back in time or within her memories or something, where we see a young Ahsoka in her early days as a Padawan. Hayden continues to look amazing. His hair is perfect. His armor looks great. I don't know what it is about that armor, but I've been wanting to see it in live action for so long. Not to mention wanting to see Rex, who we get twice in his Phase 1 and 2 armor. As great as it is to see all of that, we really get to learn what's been bothering Ahsoka probably since the Clone Wars came to an end. She is struggling with her identity as a Jedi and the kind of legacy she will leave behind. Star Wars Jedi Survivor put it well when we see Cal Kestis dealing with similar issues. He and Ahsoka never got to serve the Order as keepers of the peace. Most of their experience was learning how to be a weapon and nothing more. Anakin's chief concern is keeping his Padawan alive, at least from Ahsoka's point of view in these flashbacks. He says she has to learn to fight and keep fighting, or she will die. That feels consistent for Anakin, to focus on the safety of those he loves above all else. I think their training was far more nuanced in the Clone Wars series, but again, I can see how from Ahsoka's perspective, she is worried that all she can ever be as a Jedi is a warrior, and she knows where that led for Anakin. We then flash forward a bit to the Siege of Mandalore, Ahsoka's final major battle of the Clone Wars, not including her fight to survive Order 66. It's the epitome of her as the warrior Anakin trained. It's cool to see Maul's Mandalorians and stuff, but if I have a nitpick of these sequences, it's all the fog and haziness. I get it, it's all Ahsoka's cloudy memories. I think it would have been cooler to really see Mandalore and really see Ryloth, but I assume having Hayden and de-aging him so well took a significant portion of the budget for this episode, maybe even the entire season. Ahsoka expresses her fears that just like her master, she will only leave a legacy of darkness and destruction. We have seen throughout all of her live-action appearances so far that she is giving into those fears. She walked away from Sabine, she refused to train Grogu. Her fears that Anakin's darkness was passed on to her have kept her frozen. Like I said last week, she is in a place where she assumes the worst will happen rather than hope for the best. She quickly thinks Thrawn will return and the search for Ezra is hopeless. I think she fears attaching herself to any family or apprentice will inevitably lead to a continuing legacy of despair. Their duel ends with her gaining the upper hand on her master and a chance to cut him down. I love that her eyes flash red as she briefly considers it, but ultimately decides to cast the lightsaber away, like Luke in Return of the Jedi. I think this is her moment of forgiveness for Anakin, a realization that just because he did terrible things, that doesn't mean she will make the same choices. But also, I think forgiveness for teaching her to be a warrior above all else. In this moment, she rejects the idea that she is only a weapon. She could have destroyed her enemy, but instead decides that she can live as her own version of a Jedi. She doesn't have a master or an order to tell her what being a Jedi means anymore. She can decide what it looks like for herself. Her spirit journey comes to an end, and she is rescued from the sea by Hera and the other pilots. She wakes up a day later, and she is changed, symbolized by now wearing some of the white robes we initially saw in the Star Wars Rebels epilogue. She is Ahsoka the White now, and immediately you can see her demeanor is different, hugging Jason, smiling a lot more. The series started, and all she seemed to have in her life was her ship and Huyang. She was disconnected, but I think she's opening up to more attachment in her life. She knows of the dangers of attachment, but I think she also now knows that there isn't only one way creating and maintaining relationships can end for a Jedi. That's something we hear a lot from the dark side. I talked about it last week when Baylan told Sabine there was only one way to save Ezra, and he assumed there was only one way to reach Thrawn's galaxy, but that's fear talking. Now that Ahsoka has begun to move past her own fears, she quickly thinks of a very Jedi way to go after her friends, not by fighting or searching for the next battle, but by being connected and balanced with nature, and by literally following in Ezra's footsteps by asking the Purrgil for help. I love that this story is about finding the path forward within the plot, while Ahsoka also discovers her own emotional and spiritual path forward as a Jedi, and I love that she has no idea if her plan will work. Huyang complains that the Purrgil could take them anywhere, and Ahsoka says it's better than going nowhere, and that's the core of her journey in this episode. She has spent years mired by fears that teaching or connecting with others can only lead to darkness. She is once again trusting the Force, and she's optimistic for the best possible outcome rather than being frozen by a lack of growth. The scene of the Purrgil jumping away was beautiful. I think it's great our villains reached Thrawn's galaxy through technology and, yeah, a little witchcraft, but our heroes are going to find their way completely through their trust in the Force. The Purrgil are yet another great translation of something very weird from Star Wars animation now realized in live live action, and it works for me. I wonder how the more casual audience will take this very strange story. It's the weirdest I think live action Star Wars has ever been, and I'm loving it. I'm also so excited to finally get the story all the way into the far galaxy. Thrawn is on the horizon. And by the way, I think it's important that the New Republic fleet arrived on Cetos in the midst of this episode. It's a small fleet, but I'm going to assume they will be seeing some action before the series is over. We've heard a lot about Thrawn. People who have seen Star Wars Rebels or read any of the Thrawn books know why he's a threat, but I think there needs to be a bit of show don't tell in the final episodes. The audience who may be unfamiliar with Thrawn will need to see why he's so dangerous. So I'm guessing the final episode could end with his return to Cetos, going back home the way Morgan came. He might be limping along in a broken down Star Destroyer. The 3 New Republic ships would see it as an easy fight, and he could wind up defeating them with some tactics they're not ready for. It would be reminiscent of the Wizarding World refusing to believe Voldemort could return until they finally see him with their own eyes. That would set up future stories, and it would be kind of a bittersweet ending if I'm right, but with Ahsoka's recovered optimism, I think she'll know that while Thrawn is a danger, she, Sabine, Ezra, and the rest of her allies have a hope of defeating him. But that's all speculation for now, so I'm gonna wrap up. This was a great, trippy episode. I was hoping Ahsoka would get weird, and I'm so glad it did. It didn't answer many of the questions I had going in, but I'm okay with that. I still have questions about Mortis from the Clone Wars. Some mysteries will and should remain in Star Wars, and I was wrong to be concerned about returning to the world between worlds. It didn't introduce any new weird time travel rules, and it veered far away from any kind of multiverse possibilities. I think the only negative I have for this episode is that I missed Baylan and Shin. I love the baddies in this series, but with Ahsoka joining them in the far galaxy, I'm sure we'll see plenty of them in the final 3 episodes. Let me know what you thought of Shadow Warrior in the comments. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to keep up with all our Ahsoka coverage, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page for video reactions and audio commentaries for every episode. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.